The Cold War was a period of tensions between the Soviets and the United States that sprouted after the fall of Germany, lasting in a 44-year period between 1947 to 1991. This was not only a gap made by geopolitical ideals, but also in the stark contrast between the communist and capitalist economic theories, each country presenting an unwillingness of compromise, believing that the other's economic theory would prove detrimental to their future successes. Though both sides made moves that angered the other, one side was clearly at fault for the scale that these tensions rose to. And this was the Cold War. Directly after World War II, Stalin began to expand communism into many different satellite states because he believed that this would act as a buffer between the Soviet Union and Western Europe. Life in these states, especially Soviet-controlled East Germany, was horrible. People lived in extreme poverty to the point that wooden public benches were being dismantled to burn for heating. In response to this, the United States and their Western European allies began to drop supplies by air to these starving citizens, primarily due to the fact that the Soviets had set up a blockade to prevent ground supplies from being transported over. This forced Stalin to come up with a plan to avoid war, but to also slow down the flow of supplies so that he could retain control over East Germany. Soviet forces used searchlights to blind pilots, flew dangerously close to supply planes, and even cut off electrical power to West Berlin in attempts to slow the flow of supplies. It would be wrong to think that the Second World War broke out accidentally, or as a result of blunders committed by certain statesmen, although blunders were certainly committed. As a matter of fact, the war broke out as the inevitable result of the development of world economic and political forces on the basis of present-day monopolistic capitalism. Marxists have more than once stated that the capitalist system of world economy contains the elements of a general crisis and military conflicts that, in view of that, the development of world capitalism in our times does not proceed smoothly and evenly, but through crisis and catastrophic wars. That was an excerpt from a speech made by Stalin in 1946, after the war with Germany. Now, he was stating that capitalism cannot exist without war. To boost that capitalism to its maximum potential, that capitalism in itself breeds conflict, and America viewed this as a threat on their way of life entirely. This was a major inflation of the conflicts that we see over the course of the Cold War in one speech. Fast forward 16 years, and tensions have skyrocketed through the ceiling. The actions of the two global superpowers and their consequences had reached a climax when the Soviets began to arm Cuba with nuclear missiles aimed toward America. In an attempt to de-escalate the situation, America put the country of Cuba under quarantine to stop the influx of weapons. Then President John F. Kennedy began negotiations to have the missiles removed from Cuba with the Soviet Union. By the end of this conflict, both countries had stood down and begun attempts at disarmament.